I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The decision did not arrive with ceremony. There was no grand speech, no balcony appearance, and no warning from the palace gates. Instead, one final royal instruction changed Meghan's position in an instant and sent Harry into a fury that even those closest to him could not calm. King Charles had reached the line he was no longer willing to cross back over, and this time, the consequence carried Meghan's name. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone at Windsor Castle, with the final wording in front of him. He read the last page once, then again, slower the second time, as though each sentence carried more weight than the one before it. The document was a royal directive, meaning a formal instruction issued under the monarch's authority to guide how the crown recognizes or handles a particular matter. In this dramatized account, its purpose was brutally specific. Meghan would no longer be recognized through the remaining use of the Duchess of Sussex designation, under the terms set out by the king. What had once tied her publicly to the royal institution was being severed by his own hand. That mattered, because the title had survived every argument, every departure, and every fracture since she and Harry stepped away from official royal duties. It had become more than a name. It was the last visible bridge between two lives that had spent years moving further apart. Charles removed his glasses and placed them beside the papers without speaking. The silence stretched. He understood that signing would not feel administrative to Harry, and it would not feel symbolic to Meghan. It would feel personal. Still, he picked up the pen. A documented fictional palace account later described the monarch pausing over the signature line before finally writing his name, knowing that the moment he did, the argument would move beyond advisors, beyond protocol, and directly into his own family. The file itself had not appeared overnight. Senior aides had circulated versions privately for weeks, debating whether the issue should remain untouched, or whether continued uncertainty would weaken the crown's authority. Harry reacted exactly as Charles had feared. When confirmation reached California, he rose so sharply that the chair scraped backward across the floor. He demanded to know whether his father understood what this would mean to Meghan, what it would mean to their children, and what message it sent about whether they were still regarded as family at all. Meghan remained quieter, but that quiet only sharpened his anger. Then came the detail that changed everything. This was not merely an advisor's recommendation waiting for approval. Charles had approved it himself. Harry stared at the wording again. For him, the dispute had just stopped being institutional. It had become a decision made by a father against the woman his son had chosen to defend. Yet anger in California was only half the story. William had already been told why Charles finally acted, and the explanation led back to one specific moment Meghan believed the palace had forgotten. Harry may have heard the decision first, but to understand why Charles signed it, the story has to move past the royal decree and into the fractured relationships that made such a moment possible. Behind every royal title sits something far more fragile than ceremony: identity. For Charles, the decision represented duty. For Meghan, it struck at the last surviving public symbol of her royal chapter. And for Harry, it reopened a wound that had never properly closed. What looked like a constitutional act from a distance became, inside one family, a conflict between loyalty, marriage, inheritance, and a father-son relationship already stretched almost beyond recognition. Meghan did not raise her voice when the confirmation reached California. She sat still, listened as Harry read the wording once, then asked him to read it again. The Duchess of Sussex title, in this dramatized account, was a royal designation tied to the dukedom created when they married, connecting her to the House of Windsor. That mattered because she and Harry had built a separate life abroad, yet it still carried the memory of entering royal life. When he finished, she said quietly that the decision did not feel like a restriction. It felt like an erasure. Harry felt the insult differently. Every fight over Meghan had become, in his mind, a fight over their marriage, their children, and the choice he made to leave royal duty. He paced, insisting his father knew how this would be received. Meghan watched him grow angrier, but she remained controlled. He was defending what remained of their royal connection. She was beginning to wonder whether that connection had become the trap. Charles carried the conflict into a conversation with Queen Camilla. She watched him sit heavily after the order was signed and asked whether the cost to Harry was worth it. The king answered that leaving it unresolved would create a deeper problem for William and the monarchy. Camilla understood. This was not only about Meghan's title, but whether independent public work could blur the line between personal influence and crown authority. William had not demanded punishment. In a documented fictional palace account, the prince had pressed for clarity, arguing that royal status could not remain undefined forever when someone worked outside the institution. That difference mattered to Charles, but it meant almost nothing to Harry. Harry's anger deepened when he learned his brother had been consulted. Fury toward his father widened into suspicion toward William, the man he already believed was shaping the monarchy to come. Yet the palace had not opened this review because of theory alone. Months earlier, one specific incident had forced Charles to stop delaying. The family tensions were old, but the decision was new, and buried beneath it was one incident so uncomfortable that palace advisors would later describe it as the moment hesitation ended. Every royal rupture has a moment that looks small, until history rearranges itself around it. In this fictional account, that moment came not during a televised interview or a public confrontation, but at a private Commonwealth charity reception, where one sentence reached the king through 3 different witnesses. By the following morning, Charles was no longer asking whether the title problem could be ignored. He was asking what power he still possessed to resolve it. Charles had resisted that question for months. Palace advisors had grown uneasy about the way the Sussex titles appeared beside independent commercial projects, charitable work, and media ventures outside formal royal service, because audiences could easily mistake personal activity for something carrying crown approval. The Commonwealth, a voluntary association of nations with historic ties to Britain, often intersects with royal charity work, which made any suggestion of official endorsement especially sensitive. Yet the king had repeatedly chosen caution. Every stronger intervention risked widening the distance with Harry, and he knew another public rupture could turn an unresolved family wound into something permanent. The trigger came quietly. During a closed charity reception in London, a representative discussing an overseas initiative referred to it as operating under the Duchess of Sussex's continuing royal platform. 3 palace-connected witnesses heard the phrase. Meghan was not present, but the wording spread through the room with immediate discomfort, because it appeared to suggest that her independent work still carried an active royal mandate. One aide corrected the language privately, before the event ended, yet the damage had already been done. By nightfall, a written summary had reached Windsor. Charles stopped the briefing the next morning before the official could finish reading it. He asked whether Meghan had personally approved that exact wording. The advisor hesitated. No one knew. That uncertainty frustrated him more than a clear answer might have done, because it proved the very problem the palace had been avoiding. If nobody could determine where personal branding ended and institutional authority began, then every future event could reopen the same argument. William spoke to his father later that day with unusual restraint. He did not demand that Meghan be punished, and a documented fictional account of the exchange records him focusing instead on one principle. Ambiguity itself had become dangerous. The prince argued that the crown could not ask the public to distinguish between private influence and royal authority, if the palace refused to define the boundary clearly. Charles listened, but the words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Then, an older internal note surfaced. A palace secretary placed it before the king, showing that the title question had been raised before and repeatedly postponed out of fear that action would trigger another family crisis. Charles read the dates slowly and understood the irony. Delay had not protected Harry. It had only allowed uncertainty to harden. Harry learned months later that this obscure reception had helped trigger the review. He rejected the explanation immediately and demanded to hear the truth from his father directly. What began with one disputed phrase at a quiet reception now moved toward something far more dangerous. Harry wanted answers from Charles himself, without courtiers standing between them. There were no microphones when father and son finally faced each other. No public statements. No carefully managed royal language. In this fictional scene, Harry enters believing he can still persuade Charles to reverse course. Charles enters knowing he has already signed the order. Within minutes, the conversation stops being about titles at all. Old grievances surface, Meghan's name becomes the center of the dispute, and William's role turns a painful argument into something far more volatile. Harry arrived at Clarence's house with one condition. Once the conversation began, no senior advisors would remain in the room. Charles agreed. Clarence's house is the King's London residence, used for both private and official business. But on this day, the meeting was deliberately stripped of ceremony. The king wanted his son to hear the reasoning directly from him. He knew Harry might reject every word, but he refused to let another courtier carry a message this personal. When the door closed, the distance between monarch and prince disappeared. What remained was a father facing a furious son. Harry did not waste time. He asked whether Charles would have signed the same instruction if Meghan had never spoken openly about her royal experiences. The question landed hard. The king answered that the decision concerned constitutional clarity, meaning the need to make clear who acts with official crown authority and who does not. He insisted it was not punishment for old interviews, old accusations, or personal criticism. Harry shook his head before his father finished. To him, the explanation sounded like palace language protecting a personal choice. Harry struck the arm of his chair with his palm. He accused the institution of punishing Meghan because she had refused to disappear quietly after leaving royal duties. Charles stayed seated, but his voice hardened. He told his son that the fictional order had been drafted narrowly, not to erase Meghan from family history, but to stop a royal designation from being used in ways that could suggest official endorsement of independent work. Harry dismissed the distinction instantly. A title given through marriage, he argued, could not be treated like a badge the palace removed whenever the relationship became uncomfortable. Then Harry asked the question Charles had been expecting. Had William supported it? Charles paused. He refused to describe private conversations with the prince, saying he would not turn one son against another by exposing confidential discussions. That refusal told Harry everything he needed to hear. His anger shifted. The dispute was no longer only about his father. Now it carried the shadow of the brother he believed was shaping the monarchy that would come next. Harry stood to leave, and warned that if the palace made the decision public, he would answer publicly too. Charles did not stop him. He watched the door close and understood that the crisis had just escaped the family. Harry believed the monarchy had chosen power over reconciliation. But behind Charles's decision stood a deeper question about who controls royal identity once someone walks away from royal duty. Royal power rarely looks dramatic when it is being exercised. It appears in consultations, legal wording, precedent, and carefully measured signatures. Yet behind those dry mechanisms are human beings making decisions they know can alter relationships forever. Charles may wear the crown, but even a monarch does not act inside a vacuum. The title dispute forces him to balance family pain against the future authority of the institution he is trying to leave intact. Charles sat with a senior constitutional advisor in a small Windsor study and asked the question nobody else wanted to answer. Would restraint now look weaker than action? The advisor did not respond quickly. Styles, titles, peerages, and royal designations are not identical things. Each can carry different legal, ceremonial, or traditional meaning, which makes any change more complicated than a single order might suggest. That distinction mattered, because the king could not simply rewrite every category by personal command. Palace Council therefore shaped the fictional directive around royal recognition and permitted official usage, limiting what could be presented as carrying active crown authority. Charles listened without interruption, but the legal precision offered little comfort. The advisor warned that Harry would almost certainly interpret the decision emotionally, whatever language surrounded it. The monarch lowered his voice. Being a father, he said, did not remove the responsibilities attached to being sovereign. Harry had chosen a life outside working royal duty, and that choice meant some boundaries could no longer remain blurred simply to protect the relationship between them. The words sounded firm, but the silence afterward betrayed the cost. William entered the discussion only after the legal framework had been settled. He did not argue for humiliation or punishment. The prince pressed instead for consistency, saying anyone operating outside the working royal structure should not leave audiences wondering whether private projects carried institutional approval. The crown, meaning the authority of the monarchy as an institution rather than the personal wishes of one individual, depended on that distinction. Charles understood the argument immediately. He also understood that Harry would hear his brother's involvement very differently. Camilla raised the danger later in private. She told Charles that critics could accuse him of using royal machinery to settle a family feud. The queen consort did not soften the warning. If the decision looked personal, every constitutional explanation would be dismissed as camouflage. He answered that uncertainty carried its own danger. If the palace allowed the question to remain unresolved because the family feared another confrontation, temporary ambiguity could become permanent precedent. Then discussion became enforcement. Meghan felt the change before the public argument had even finished gathering force. One revised introduction, one altered line of protocol, and the abstract decision suddenly became real. The arguments inside Windsor had ended with signatures, but outside those walls, the reality of the decision was about to become painfully tangible. The true impact of a royal decision is not always felt when the announcement appears. Sometimes it arrives later, through a changed invitation, a revised introduction, or a familiar form of address that suddenly disappears. For Meghan, the fictional stripping of her final Duchess designation becomes real when a planned appearance is quietly rewritten. Harry sees the change as deliberate humiliation. Meghan sees something colder, proof that the palace intends the decision to be permanent. Meghan noticed the alteration while reviewing the briefing for an international charitable forum at home. Organizers had received updated guidance stating that she should no longer be introduced through the royal designation covered by Charles's directive. That guidance, in this dramatized account, was part of a new protocol, meaning a formal set of rules controlling how royal names and titles were used in official settings. Palace staff were also reviewing websites, ceremonial references, and future correspondence to make sure the change appeared everywhere consistently. The reason mattered. A single old reference could suggest that the crown had changed its mind, or that the new boundary was only temporary. Meghan circled the revised introduction and placed the page down. She did not shout. She simply told Harry that she would still attend. The calmness unsettled him more than anger might have. He wanted them to withdraw completely, arguing that appearing under the new wording would allow Charles's decision to define the terms of their public life. Meghan disagreed. If she cancelled because the title was gone, she said, then the title would appear more important than the work itself. Harry pushed back. To him, accepting the change felt dangerously close to accepting the humiliation. Harry began talking about a response. He wanted language strong enough to make clear that the palace had crossed a line. Meghan listened, but her frustration moved in another direction. She was becoming tired of measuring every future decision against what the monarchy had done. He still wanted confrontation. She wanted distance. For the first time since the directive was signed, their anger was no longer perfectly aligned. Charles received a written summary of the reaction later that day. A documented fictional palace account described the king becoming visibly tense when an aide told him Harry had privately called the action an attack on his wife. He read that line twice, yet when asked whether implementation should be paused, he refused. Suspending it now, he believed, would make the crown appear uncertain after weeks of private debate. Meghan finally turned to Harry and asked him to stop fighting long enough to hear what she actually wanted. The request caught him off guard. Harry had spent years believing he must defend Meghan from the institution he left. But now she was about to tell him that his anger might be keeping them tied to the crown more tightly than the title ever did. The turning point does not come from Buckingham Palace. It comes in private, without lawyers, courtiers, advisors, or royal protocols. Harry expects Meghan to share his determination to challenge the decision until Charles backs down. Instead, she tells him something he is not prepared to hear. She refuses to let a title determine whether she has won or lost. Suddenly, the person most visibly affected by the decree becomes the one asking Harry to stop fighting it. Harry kept returning to the statement on his phone. He wanted something strong, something that would make silence impossible to mistake for surrender. A public response, in this context, meant a formal message released directly to the press or through official channels, so that their position could not be rewritten by anyone else. He believed the palace had already defined the story once. He would not let it happen again. Meghan, however, had begun to see the decision differently. What felt like an attempt to strip something away was also forcing an ending she had spent years trying to avoid naming. Meghan asked him to put the phone down. No aides were present. No advisor was waiting outside the room. She told him that every furious reply gave the monarchy another place inside their daily life, another reason for the next morning to begin with Charles, William, or some fresh royal dispute. Harry resisted. Then the anger broke open. He admitted that this was never only about her title. It was about his father, his brother, his mother's memory. It was about watching pieces of the world he had grown up inside disappear while being told those losses were simply consequences. Harry stopped when Meghan answered more softly. She told him she did not need the Duchess designation to prove that their marriage mattered, that their children belonged to them, or that the work they had built outside royal service was real. The title had once connected her to a powerful institution, but she refused to let its removal decide whether her life after that institution had value. The words disarmed him more completely than any argument from Charles ever had. Meghan watched as he opened the statement again. Harry read the first paragraph, held his thumb over the screen, then deleted it. A documented fictional account of the private exchange later described him telling her that if she truly wanted to move forward, he would try to stop dragging them backward into every old battle. He did not suddenly forgive his father. He did not trust William more. But for the first time, he chose silence, without seeing it as defeat. The battle inside their home began to cool. At the exact moment the battle outside it exploded across headlines, broadcasts, and the gates of Britain's royal residences. By sunrise, the fictional royal decision is no longer private family pain. It belongs to television panels, newspaper editors, crowds outside palace gates, and millions of people arguing over what the monarchy should mean in the modern world. Some see Charles enforcing a necessary boundary. Others see a father escalating an already broken family feud. But But one image outside Buckingham Palace comes to define the morning more powerfully than any commentator's words. Charles watched a morning broadcast for less than 5 minutes before asking for it to be switched off. The coverage described the decision as one of the clearest institutional separations between Harry and Meghan and the working monarchy since they stepped away from official duties. The working monarchy means the group of senior royals who carry out formal duties on behalf of the crown, making any boundary between them and independent family members deeply significant. Commentators argued over whether the king had finally created necessary clarity or whether he had turned a private family fracture into public punishment. Camilla noticed his expression tighten but said nothing. She understood that what some viewers called a victory did not feel victorious inside that room. Harry faced the same noise thousands of miles away. One commentator declared that Meghan had now lost the final symbol of her royal identity. Another suggested the decision proved there was no path back to the old arrangement. His hand moved toward the laptop as if he might respond, but he stopped. He remembered what she had told him the night before. Every angry answer pulled the palace back into the center of their lives. Meghan watched him close the screen. For once, silence did not look like surrender. It looked like control. Outside Buckingham Palace, the fictional story took on a life of its own. A small crowd gathered near the gates as commuters slowed to read newspaper stands nearby. One major morning paper carried the headline, "The Final Title Falls," above side-by-side photographs of Charles and Meghan. Phones lifted. The front page spread rapidly across social platforms, turning a complicated family conflict into one brutal image. Supporters of the monarchy called the decision overdue. Critics called it unnecessary. The argument hardened by the hour. Then, a veteran royal broadcaster offered a colder interpretation. In this dramatized account, he described the decision during a recorded morning segment as the formal closing of a door that had remained half open for years. The phrase cut through the shouting because it suggested something larger than punishment. This was separation becoming final. Charles heard the line later. Harry saw it repeated online. Meghan did too. None of them responded. The world had delivered its judgment loudly. But the final meaning of this moment belonged to the three people whose lives were changed by it most deeply. In the end, the fictional stripping of Meghan's final Duchess designation does not produce the triumph anyone expected. Charles gains the constitutional clarity he wanted, but not the reconciliation he once hoped might follow. Harry loses another symbolic connection to the royal world of his birth, yet discovers that defending his family does not always require another battle. And Meghan, stripped of a title meant to define her royal place, chooses to prove she can continue without it. Charles returned to the Windsor study, where the decision had first become real. Palace references had now been updated, future formal usage had changed, and no reversal was planned. The directive, meaning the formal instruction that defined how the crown would recognize and use the disputed royal designation, had moved beyond debate into permanent practice. That mattered, because the original uncertainty was gone. Harry and Meghan would continue their independent lives, while working royal authority remained clearly separated from them. The king looked again at the retained copy of the instruction, closed the folder, and told an aide that no further statement about his son or daughter-in-law should be issued, unless absolutely necessary. Harry reached his own conclusion, far from Windsor. In a private conversation with Meghan, he admitted that he still believed his father had gone too far. He had not suddenly forgiven Charles, and the pain surrounding William had not vanished either. But he finally understood that fighting endlessly over the title would allow the monarchy to keep controlling the emotional rhythm of their home. Meghan listened, then reminded him that they had already chosen another life. For once, he did not argue. Meghan tested that choice when she attended her next major charitable appearance under her own name. There was no Duchess introduction, No royal designation replaced what had been removed. She simply continued. The absence that had once seemed humiliating now carried a different meaning. The work could survive without the title. Harry recognized it too. What Charles had taken away no longer possessed the power to determine what came next. William saw the aftermath differently. For the prince, the episode established a principle the future monarchy could not avoid. Royal authority could not survive indefinitely behind blurred boundaries. Charles understood that reasoning, yet he also understood the cost. Institutional clarity had been achieved, but the price was a family relationship pushed into a more distant, permanent shape. The fictional crisis ended without reconciliation, but also without another explosion. Charles chose the crown's boundaries. Harry chose his marriage over another confrontation. Meghan chose an identity that no longer depended on royal recognition. The title disappeared, and with it, disappeared the argument over whether she still belonged inside the royal structure. The decree took away a Duchess title, but its deeper consequence was far more permanent. It forced Charles, Harry, and Meghan to stop living between two worlds, and finally accept which side of the royal divide each of them had chosen. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.